I'm joined today by Nicholas Whitaker. I had the pleasure of joining him recently on his Needs Improvement podcast, where we talked about my own health crisis. In return, he graciously accepted my offer to reciprocate. So, Nicholas, thank you for agreeing to come on today to share your time and your story.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me here today.
My pleasure. So to kick things off, Nicholas, perhaps you could share a little bit about yourself and what led to your mission with the Changing Work Collective.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. So, yeah, I'm a coach. I work mainly with the mid-career tech professionals that have kind of hit a crossroads in their life and looking for something different. And I myself am a recovering tech professional. I actually left the tech space about a year ago after a mass layoff. And in that period in time, after getting laid off, I did a little bit of soul searching into trying to figure out, well, what is it exactly I want to do with this time and this opportunity that's been given to me? And what came to mind for me was trying to help heal and correct some of the systemic issues that are happening within organizations and within leadership, which exacerbates mental health struggles and challenges that so many people have within these spaces. And I was fortunate enough to get together with a friend of mine, Scott Shute, who became my co-founder. And we created this community to help folks like ourselves who are interested in doing the work of changing work from the inside out and helping them find community, find information and knowledge peer-to-peer, as well as through service providers and other experts that we bring into the community. And then also find ways to collaborate because we can't do this work alone.
Fantastic. So you've referred to it as a conscious workplace online.
Yeah.
What are some hallmarks of a conscious workplace?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to kind of back into it from almost the opposite direction. What are some hallmarks of an unconscious workplace? And that's often the types of people who come to me for coaching are folks that have been in these environments and they've discovered that what they have and the skills that they have are not sufficient enough to deal with some of the systemic issues that they're running into. So oftentimes what they run into is bullying within the workplace. They run into leadership that is not aware of mental health struggles and doesn't know how to manage somebody who has a mental health concern, or even beyond mental health concerns, just neurodiversity more broadly. There's a lack of education, a lack of awareness around these issues. So a lot of times how that manifests is with burnout, depression, anxiety, lack of confidence in their abilities, and it's a spiral from there. And it exacerbates existing conditions, and in some cases can actually cause new ones to occur. So what I look for when I'm thinking about a conscious business or a conscious team or a conscious leader is a few things. And I think at the very core of it, it's regarding not just profits and not just outcomes, but regarding all stakeholders within an organization. That includes employees, that includes the environment that these companies are in, includes the community. And, when you think about it from a tactical standpoint or from a practical standpoint, it's so much about creating environments where there's psychological safety, there's a decent amount of well-being within an organization, and that fosters environments where innovation and creativity can occur.
So what are some ways employees can advocate for better workplace practices within their existing workplace?
Yeah, that's probably one of the toughest questions because so much of that requires the will for leadership to actually make change and actually to listen to their employees. It depends a lot on the environment that they're in. In a lot of cases, whistleblowers or other folks that might stand up to point out what's happening within an organization that's creating poor mental health outcomes or poor performance outcomes can often be chastised or managed out of organizations because the inherent system that they're in wants to keep things as they are because it's benefiting someone, right? Whether that's the leadership team or folks that have got this kind of like bit of an empire that they've built. So what I try to advocate for folks to do is a few things. First of all, take care of yourself first. And it's always about putting your own oxygen mask on first, understanding that there is potentially things that are impacting your well-being within these environments, seeking support, whether that's through a therapist or a coach or a peer group. A lot of things that I've seen to be very successful is to have groups of people that are grassroots organized coming together to share their experiences and destigmatize the struggle that they might be encountering. I think another piece of that then too is being really clear about what resources you have available. Some organizations will provide what they call EAP services or employee assistance programs, essentially therapists. Typically speaking, EAP services are very low attendant. People don't tend to trust EAP services because they're provided by the company. And what I've noticed is particularly with men within American corporations, they don't tend to really seek out support in the same way that women do. So there's a bit of a gender bias there as well, in terms of like what types of support is being provided and what type of support is being accessed. But I also believe that there's a lot of room for advocacy. So, I'm a vocal and outspoken person myself. Probably has something to do with some of the struggles that I've had in some of the workplaces I worked at. But I felt it was incredibly important to what I would call hold truth to power, and to speak into the harms that are being done by unconscious leaders or by toxic teams, and to create support networks so people don't feel so alone. And I think maybe that's the biggest thing that I see is a lot of people that I talk to, they tend to feel that their experience is an isolated one. They feel that they're the only one that's really struggling in this way. And I think there's a lot of power in coming together in community and sharing stories, much like what you're doing here with More Than Our Story, to let people know that you're not alone, that there are solutions out there, and that there are other people that are willing to share their stories to help you find the language and find the ways of understanding what's happening in your environment.
So along that note, what things should a prospective employee look for or maybe ask about when trying to ascertain the workplace culture and environment in which they're looking to enter?
Yeah, and that's a tricky one too, because you're gonna go into an interview, you're gonna talk to a hiring manager or recruiter, potentially other people that are interviewing within that company, and the chances of them being like, oh yeah, this is a toxic team and this manager is a particularly poor manager, is probably not a conversation that's going to occur. So there's going to be a lot of window dressing. There's going to be a lot of conversations about how awesome this organization is and like all these goals and missions and all these things, and the values are going to be stated potentially. So what I recommend for folks to do is do your research. It's going outside of those interviews and actually talking with other people that have either worked in those companies or worked in those teams if possible. Networking, I think, is always going to be a powerful tool here. There's websites that people can go on to, like Glassdoor and other rating sites that talk about companies, but those are often a bit biased. Like the people that tend to go on, much like Yelp, to give like poor reviews, or people that are disgruntled, right? So like you're going to have a bit of a bias there in terms of the types of feedback that's being given. But more importantly than that, I think so much of culture is not something that you really can define or spot flags of until you're in the actual culture. So you're in the actual work environment. So what I actually advocate more so for folks is to trust and verify. It's like what is it, 1940s or maybe before kind of philosophy of, go in with an open heart and go in with a trusting viewpoint, but verify that as you go on. Part of this is being vigilant and just paying attention to what some of the signs and signals are of an unhealthy team. And be prepared if you need to pivot. There's nothing wrong with starting in an organization, getting in there, realizing that, oh, this is actually an unhealthy organization, an unhealthy team, and making the important decision that you need for yourself to remove yourself from that situation and move on. Some folks might try to fight against those systems and might try to advocate, and I do encourage that. But at some point, you need to be able to say, okay, this is harming me. This is causing poor outcomes for myself. I need to make the decision that I need to make to take care of myself and move on.
So actually, just speaking to that point exactly, you've mentioned that your own layoff did not come as a surprise. There were many red flags that you've talked about in your posts. How can an employee protect themselves when they think they're getting in that situation, and to what degree do you think that's something that really belongs to the employee?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, look, there's only so much that one can do, right? You can advocate for yourself, you can document, this is something that I recommend to folks so that if you're being abused in some way or being discriminated against, like documenting everything that you can is always a good tactic, because then you can bring that up in HR conversations, or Lord forbid you actually need to go and get a lawyer. You have some sort of a documentation there, but that really doesn't change the actual experience of being in those environments. That's more of like a protective measure after the fact. I think in a lot of regards, it's about understanding what your values are, understanding what your needs are, and understanding, what your boundaries and non-negotiables are. And if you have a clear idea of what those things are, then you can have a little bit an even easier time to say, like, okay, am I willing to be in this maybe unhealthy environment for X amount of time in order for me to be able to hit these goals that I'm trying to achieve? Or do I have the support network that I need to allow me to be able to thrive within these environments, even though they might not be healthy? But all of that's on the individual, right? That's on the individual person to be able to determine those things and make those decisions. And that doesn't really address the more of the systemic issues that are happening within these organizations. And that's really where Changing Work Collective and the work that we're doing to try to bring together experts and subject matter experts and practitioners that are trying to change work from the inside out and put them in touch with leaders and teams that are interested in understanding how to operate more consciously and how to operate with more compassion. So yeah, to some degree, like it is partially on the individual to take care of themselves and to identify when a situation is unhealthy and to make the hard decision to leave. But there's more that needs to be done there. And I think that's so much of what we're trying to do is we're trying to create environments where we don't even have to have these conversations, right? Where people have the skills that they need, they have the support, they have the coaching. The teams are set up in a way that allows them to thrive. And that's a longer term goal, and that's like a longer road to travel. But I think we have to do both things. We have to help the individual, and we also have to help heal the organizations that are causing harm in the first place.
So to speak on the individuals, as a career and a life coach, what are some of the most common things that people who have either been laid off or they're looking to make a career shift, what are some of the things they need to really hear and to keep in mind as their journey unfolds?
Oh, I love this question. Well, so many of the folks that come to me either in a career crossroads or who have experienced a recent layoff or a job loss, often what comes up is it's like those core Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Like their sense of security has been ruptured, their sense of stability has been disrupted. Oftentimes, confidence is shot. Their sense of self has been compromised. In a lot of cases, these folks that I work with, they've been struggling for a long period of time in an environment that really isn't suited for them or isn't a good fit for them. And they've internalized that as being a failure of their own in some way. I was like, oh, it's probably because I couldn't hack it, or I didn't have the right skills, or whatever the actual story is. And what I try to encourage to people is to really specifically focus on mindset and self-care. So making sure that you have practices of affirmation, you have practices of countering negative self-talk, you have practices that allow you to get those racing thoughts and get those maybe negative thought loops that are happening down on paper and make them real. Name those feelings. So there's a bit of an emotional awareness and emotional intelligence skills that are needed there. Mindfulness is a big strategy that I encourage folks to practice, whether that's formal meditation or more kind of what I would call casual mindfulness, just being aware of what's actually happening in your experience. That can go a really long way. Having a support network, I think, is really, really critical. And this is something I advocate for anybody to have, whether they're in a career crossroads or not. So that might be in the form of friends and family. That might be in the form of a pastor or a religious leader of some sort. That could be a coach or a therapist. And it could be a collection of all of those things. But to have that kind of board of directors there to support you, I think is a really, really important thing at any stage in life. And then from there, I think depending on where someone's at within their transition and within their career, the thing that I think quite a bit about are transferable skills. I think a lot of times we discount what it is we actually have to bring to the table. And we figure like, oh, I've been doing this one type of job all these years. And then all of a sudden, and this has happened with, say, recruiting and UX design, for example, right now, those jobs are kind of hard to come by. So if you're in recruitment or you're in UX, you might be at this crossroads of your career where I've been trained in doing these things for 10 or 15 years and suddenly I can't find a job doing it. And then the question becomes like, well, how do you transport those skills into something else that might be tangential or completely off left field, but would be able to utilize the skill sets that you have? So that requires a bit of an understanding of skills and strengths and virtues. And that's, again, where, having a coach or having a therapist can come in really handy to help you parse out some of those things, get really crystal clear on what it is you have to offer so that you can then go out and seek roles that would really be able to allow you to utilize those skills effectively.
What's the best piece of advice you ever received that you use every day?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Start where you're at. I think that was probably one of the most important pieces of advice I've ever gotten. And it was given to me from a mentor and a coach, actually, somebody that I had worked with for a long, long time. And what I understood that to mean was that we have inherently skills and resources and a knowledge set and a life experience that is powerful. It's gotten us here, right? And if we can start from where we're at, instead of starting from this position of lack or scarcity of like, oh, I don't have these skills, or I don't have this network, or I don't have all of these things. If you can start from resourcing yourself of like what it is that you do have, then I think it can be a very powerful tool set to be able to then deploy in the job search or in accelerating your career or just finding greater well-being within your day-to-day experience. That, again, requires a little bit of emotional intelligence, and that requires creating a space which allows you to be still enough to understand where you actually are. But I think that's so much of like what I do with my clients is like help them build an awareness and build the stillness in their life to arrive to what's already happening, put a name to what their experience is, set some goals, and then create some milestones to get them to where it is that they're trying to get to based on the resources and skills that they have.
Fantastic. I want to preface this next question with the caveat that not all of us can monetarily afford to do so. But recently on your LinkedIn channel, you posted a letter of support to yourself from this time last year. Looking back now through the lens of a year's reflection, how important do you think taking time off is to personal growth and healing after a layoff?
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, first of all, for reading my posts. But yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's critical. And I would almost challenge the idea that we can't afford always to do these things. In the short term, there might be a financial sting. There might be some sacrifices that need to be made. You might need to make choices in lifestyle. But whether it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I think that we should all build in these little sabbaticals throughout our life. Because what happens, I think, when we don't do this is we end up running on autopilot. And, we might be running a script or running a system that has worked for us in our 20s and our 30s, but we get up into our 40s maybe, and suddenly we realize that those old tricks don't work anymore. So being able to stop and reset and to be able to arrive to who you are in this moment, to what's happening within your body, what's happening within your heart, what is your mindset? Like, what are your goals? Like, where do you want to go? Like, that requires a little bit of space. What I also advocate for folks too, and look, like I spent a long time in poverty. I spent a long time before I worked in tech, getting by barely paycheck to paycheck. So the idea of taking like a week or two off would have been impossible. I needed that to survive, just to get food on the table. But what you can do is you can carve out 5 minutes a day in the morning and in the evening to get your thoughts down on paper. And over time, cumulatively, you can start to get a little bit of a library of an understanding of yourself, and to get those goals down and to get a little bit more clarity around where you're getting held up and tripped up on things. But there's an enormous amount of value, particularly if you've been dealing with mental health struggles or if you've been dealing with some sort of a toxic work environment. Personally, I took a 3.5-month mental health leave. I was a short-term medical leave. I got it paid for through my company. I thought I was completely justified in doing that because so much of the anxiety and stress that I was experiencing was because of the organization that I was in. And that 3 months allowed me to settle my nervous system, settle my limbic system, get myself to a place where I was able to figure out what I wanted to do in the world, and then start to put some plans into place to be able to get me there. And then by the time I got laid off, I had already done a lot of the work ahead of time. So once the layoff happened, it was painful and it sucked, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was like, oh, okay, I've already done a lot of this groundwork and I know where I'm going.
I like that. Just it doesn't need to be considered a big time off, but just section out little pieces of each day to kind of, okay.
Yeah, or even on the weekends, I think intentionality is, really so much about this. The average person, I think, they'll work for the weekend. They go through the motions, they punch their clocks, they do whatever the work is that they need to do, and it's like, oh, TGIF, thank goodness it's Friday. We're actually recording this on a Friday. And it's interesting now, like not being in those environments. For me, every day is kind of a Friday. Like every day, I'm waking up with passion. I'm waking up with excitement because of the work that I'm doing. It's like I actually have the other issue where it's like I need to very intentionally carve time out for downtime. And this is something I talk a lot with my clients about. It's like, are you being intentional about your weekends and your time off after you're working? Or are you just preparing for the next week ahead? So if you could carve out even an hour over the weekend just to sit down and be still and be quiet and be with your thoughts, maybe with a journal in hand and a pen, that can be a very, very powerful tool set. And cumulatively over time, what you end up with then is a data set that you can go back and refer back to. One of the things that I really like to encourage my clients to do is take a look. There's a book called The 5-Minute Journal. It should really be called the 10-minute journal because it's 5 minutes in the morning and it's 5 minutes at night. And it's just some basic questions, some basic prompts that kind of can help you set your mindset and your perspective up for greater well-being. And over time, what you can then do is you can go back through and you can look for trends and be like, oh, every day I'm listing that what I'm grateful for is my partner and my wife. What I'm really grateful for is the environment that I live in. And the things that could be better are the type of work that I'm doing. And you can see these trends over and over and over again showing up in your journal. And then it becomes something that you can then take action on. But if you're not doing that work, if you're not doing that introspection, if you're not giving yourself that space and that time to process, well, you're just ending up with like all this unmet need and unexpressed need occurring within your system that over time turns into anxious thoughts, Sunday scaries, and all of those other things. So yeah, whatever it requires, whether it's 5 minutes or a few months, I think it's worth taking that time as long as it's intentional.
That's a great point. So I'd like to take this back full circle to the Needs Improvement podcast. It's a truly unique and inspired forum that you've created. Can you share what it's about and how it came to be?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, for the kind words. To me, it came out of a little bit of anger and a little bit of spite, honestly. If you're in the corporate space or if you've gone through performance reviews, a lot of these organizations will rank your performance based on a scale. And it usually goes somewhere from like superb or excellent to like, okay, like what are the other ones? It's like, significant improvement, moderate impact, like whatever it might be. And usually the very one at the very bottom, where it's like right before you get put on a performance plan, is called needs improvement. And to me, it's such a negative connotation, right? And almost to me, it almost is looking at the wrong issue. It's like, oh, well, you need improvement. It's like, well, do I, or does the system that I'm in need improvement? Or maybe I need different coaching. Maybe I need different support structures. And I always kind of bristled at the idea of being ranked as needs improvement. So for me, what I wanted to reclaim that language from a place of empowerment and actually flip it on its head a little bit. So it's not so much like the individual that needs improvement, but it's the organizations and the systems that they're a part of that really needs improvement. So the podcast really talks to folks like ourselves who have struggled with mental health or well-being within the workplace. And it talks to the experts and the folks that are trying to make a difference out there to make the workplace a happier and healthier place to be. And the idea is to try to uncover best practices and to destigmatize the struggle of mental health first and foremost to let people know that they're not alone in this experience, but then also potentially for them to be able to find resources to help them navigate these, very difficult experiences that so many of us are going through. So for me, needs improvement, it's a reclamation of power. It's providing agency for folks. And it's, shining a spotlight on the systemic issues within these organizations that is making it so difficult for people to thrive.
You already know how I'm a big fan of that podcast.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and your episode was probably one of my favorites so far. And it's folks like yourself that I really love to speak to, because we all have our own journeys, we all have our own personal experiences. But what I often hear when I talk to people is that there are similarities between these experiences. That if we just knew how close we were to having a similar experience, like maybe we'd be able to be a little bit more open with each other. We'd be able to talk about these things a little bit more fluidly, and it wouldn't be something that we're all just suffering silently alone with, expecting it to somehow just resolve itself.
Absolutely. Well, Nicholas, thank you for everything you have done, you continue to do. These conversations are vital, obviously, because, we spend most of our adult life either at work or thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing is showing us that it can be rewarding. And I think to steal a line out of your book, it can be more than a paycheck and a title.
Yeah.
Which I wish more of us were in this positive, mindful place when it comes to work, and not weekend warriors. Trudging through the Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
So where can people find you online?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Daniel, thank you for that note. I think for me, so much of this is about finding greater purpose and meaning beyond your paychecks and titles. And, people often ask me, well, what does that mean? Am I just going to quit my job? Am I just going to go live on the beach someplace? It's like, yeah, well, maybe if that's what you really want to do. But I think the underlying question within that is what is your purpose here on this planet? What is it you're trying to do out there in the world? And how do you want to make the world a better place, ideally? And maybe that's a lofty goal. And maybe it's just how do I just thrive on an individual level? But, I think when you can find purpose and when you can find meaning outside of just your work, then it becomes a lifestyle. It becomes a way of being versus just a way of doing. So I encourage people to do that inner work and investigate. But to answer your question, for folks that are interested in finding out more about me and learning more about me, I'm very easy to find. You can search me online, nicholaswhitaker.com. I have podcasts and interviews like this one on there. I have frameworks, meditations, all kinds of resources. You can also find our organization, Changing Work Collective, at changingwork.org. So if you're interested in learning more about how to get involved and how to change work from the inside out, that's another really fantastic resource. And I practically live on LinkedIn. So if you just search me on LinkedIn and hit me up via DMs, I'm happy to have a chat.
All right, Nicholas, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, man. This is great.